One thing I'd like to say is that I don't live in a prison, and I'm not afraid of anything. I haven't built any walls around myself. I'm just like anyone else. I need love and water.
Minneapolis, Saturday, June 7th, 1958. The day this remarkable human being was born into this world, to parents Mattie Shaw and John L. Nelson. Named after his father's jazz trio, he is, of course, Prince Rogers Nelson. Prince had a difficult childhood growing up, living with his mother and father and sister Tyka, who was born 2 years after Prince. He suffered from epilepsy until the age of 7 and was sure heaven marked the deck. He hated his name and went by the nickname Skippy, and then, aged 10, his parents separated and divorced. Prince showed an early interest in music and wrote his first song, Funk Machine, aged 7. Prince's father left the piano behind when he left, and Prince would practice, and the first songs he taught himself to play were the themes to his favourite TV shows, Batman and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. After Prince's parents divorced, his mother remarried to Hayward Baker, and they had a son, Omar, Prince's half-brother. Prince had a difficult relationship with his stepfather and spent the next few years moving back and forth, moving between his mother and stepfather and his own father, before finally ending up in the basement of his friend's house, Andre Anderson, later to be renamed Andre Simone. The two had become friends at school and shared a passion for music, and it wasn't long before they had formed their first band, Grand Central. Prince was on keyboards and guitar, Andre Anderson was on bass, and Prince's second cousin, Charles Chaz Smith, was on drums. Later on, Andre's sister Linda was also in the band on keyboards, as well as Terry Jackson and William Doughty on percussion. They were mainly an instrumental band, playing clubs and parties, schools, YMCAs, and Battle of the Band contests in the Minneapolis area. In 1974, Chaz Smith was replaced on the drums by Morris Day. By this time, the band were starting to play their own material, much of it written and arranged by Prince. And after Morris Day's mother became the group's manager, they changed their name to Grand Central Corporation. In 1976, Grand Central Corporation were now called Champaign, and they recorded some tracks at Moon Sound Studios in Minneapolis. Moon Sound was owned by Chris Moon, who worked at an advertising agency and as a promoter for local gigs. At his studio, Moon recorded commercials and made demo tapes with local groups. He also fancied himself a lyricist and was looking for someone to write songs with. After seeing Prince in the studio with Champaign, he approached him about collaborating.
At the time there was a group in the studio recording called Champaign, and Andre Simone and Prince and the whole group. And so I pulled Prince aside after a session one day, and I said, "Look, I got this idea. I'd like to sit down and talk to you about it." So he came back that evening after the group had left, and we started talking deals. My idea is that, hey, why don't we get together? Why don't we team up, combine our resources, combine our talents, and I'll teach you how to record, and I'll teach you how to produce, and I'll teach you everything I know. And, I'll produce a demo tape for you. And if it goes somewhere, great. If it doesn't, then we've both learned from the process. But if we get something out there, I don't want to contract with you. I don't want to put any of this on paper, because I want this an agreement of the heart, not agreement of the paper. And if something goes somewhere, all I want is just that you credit my name on the songs that you end up using. And I think that he thought 2 or 3 fractions of a second and nodded his head. I recall there wasn't a long oratory response to the question, just a head nod. And that was the beginning of the agreement. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keychain And he was this little 16-year-old, you know, afro-headed, 5-foot black kid from the north side that I didn't know very well. And I handed him my key. And I said, here's the key to the studio. You let yourself in after school. You come over here and practice. And then when I get back, we'll sit down and we'll work on stuff together. And I'll leave lyrics on the piano. And if you find any you like, work on them. And I remember Prince kind of looked at me a little shocked when I handed him the key, because that was really a good gesture of trust and faith on that part, and he never betrayed it. He was always, you know, very, very reliable and punctual. After I taught him how to record, it was really funny. I'd reach up to the board and turn up a little treble, and then he'd reach up to the board and turn down a little treble. Then I'd reach up to the board and turn up an instrument, and he'd reach up to the board and turn down a different instrument, and so our hands were all over the place. It was like this octopus had spawned in the studio and had become a recording engineer. So even from the beginning, he had a lot of input, a lot of sense on the tonal textures, the balance, the way the sounds fit together, and he wanted to express that input. And I think as soon as he learned how to operate that equipment, he had the means to do that. Our focus was always to push the envelope of normality and try and get into things that we wouldn't normally do. We would bring flute players in for funk songs, and we'd use obscure instruments. We'd tune the drums all weird and slow the tape down, and anything that was not natural, not a normal process within the recording system back then, we would be playing with. Prince came back from New York after I'd lined him up with his first record company meeting, and both of us were a little astounded that the record company hadn't heard a hit. We thought, well, we can hear it, how come they can't hear it? And so then the question became, what are we going to do to market you, Prince, now that you know, our one main shot hasn't quite materialized the way we had hoped. And so I decided that what I needed to do was to try and find some talent, some managerial type talent here in town that I could use that would help me to promote this artist. And there was one gentleman named Owen Husney who was with a company that promoted folk artists. And I'd always liked Owen, we'd always got along pretty well, and he'd always struck me as a very professional, kind of responsible individual. He was a businessman, he was doing this on an ongoing basis, he had experience, he had a suit. And I thought that was important, that we could put somebody in a suit in front of the record company and have that kind of a presentation. So I went over to Owen and took my tape under my arm and sat down with him and I said, look, I got something I want to share with you here.
Finally, after 5 days of him sitting on my couch in my reception area, I said, come on in. And he plays this tape. And I said, it's great, it's unbelievable, who's the group? And he said, sit down. And I said, what do you mean? He said, sit down. So I said, well, who's the group? You got to tell me who the group is. We have to get to them. He said, it's not. He said, it's one guy writing everything, singing everything, playing all the instruments. And I just looked at him, you know, in my business-like manner, and I said, does he live here? Does he live in Minneapolis?
In spring 1976, Prince signs with American Artists Incorporated, a firm formed by Owen Husney and his lawyer friend Gary Levison. Prince was given a $50 a week allowance, and Husney bought him several instruments, including his first synthesizer. They recorded a new demo at Sound 80 Studios, which included Soft and Wet, Make It Through the Storm, and a new song called Baby. A fashion photographer was brought in, and 15 deluxe promo kits were put together, which included 5 sheets with one picture and one quote from Prince on each one. In early 1977, Prince and Andre Simone were asked to record for 94 East, a band put together by Peppy Willie, husband to Prince's cousin Chantel Mandeville. Prince and Andre performed as studio musicians on a number of tracks, and Prince wrote Just Another Sucker. The sessions were eventually released some years later, titled Minneapolis Genius, the Historic 1977 Recordings, and then again in 1995 as 94 East featuring Prince, Symbolic Beginning. Prince himself, however, never acknowledged its existence, and it's unknown why. In the spring of 1977, Husney took Prince's new demo tape and met with 5 record companies.
I found him to be extremely intelligent, and that, again, that's, I think, when I saw how well focused he was and how intelligent he was, and the fact that he was like 16 or 17 then or whatever, but he had the mind of like a 35-year-old, and that's how focused he was. That's when I made a decision that I was going to leave whatever. I owned 3 companies at that time, and I made a decision to walk away from those 3 companies and devote my life to him. But my first belief was, okay, we've got to do something here, and we got to get our rear ends out to the West Coast. We got to make a record deal for him as soon as possible, and it has to be first class. So we got on the plane and we went out there and we had our top #1 attorney in the town, so we were first class all the way. Nothing was going to stop us. And we made presentations to all these labels, and we did present to ABC, RSO, Warner Brothers, CBS Records, and A&M Records. I do still have the letter of rejection from Al Corey at RSO Records that passed on him, saying that, you know, they didn't feel that he was a talent. I do have a letter, I can't find the letter from ABC, but A&M, CBS, and Warner Brothers all offered us deals almost on the spot. Not quite, but it was almost on the spot. And so I got on a plane, came back to Minneapolis, and I can remember here I was, this guy from this little, everybody thought was a cow town. They couldn't even figure out how did you guys from this little cow town in the frigid north with no black people, why were you out here with this young black kid presenting this tape? And after they heard the tape, it was unbelievable. So, make a long story short, I came back to Minneapolis and I have the heads of all these record labels. I'm just this little guy from this cow town, right? My phone is ringing off the hook with the heads of all these major record companies. It was, for me, it was a dream come true.
On the 25th of June 1977, Prince signs with Warner Brothers, and one of the most incredible and prolific careers in music history was about to begin.